Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome. I'm Nick Bailey. I'm one of the co-founders of this conference from day one. On behalf of myself, my two co-founders, Steve Koepp and Aaron Sauter, who are here, you may see around, as well as the other 15 members of our team, many of whom are here today. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks again for being part of the health precautions that we're going through today and just being flexible and rolling with all this. We really appreciate it. Thank you. We know how remarkable it is that people are here at all. We love Atlanta. We couldn't be happier to see you guys and spend time with you, with the business community here. Atlanta's been a part of the vibrant business community for decades, and also, at the center of some of the most important and enduring social and social justice movements of this century. But our feelings about Atlanta are also personal. Right here in this room, literally on this stage, is the last place that we did a conference in February 25th of 2020. We gathered in person for what would turn out to be the last time for about 2 years. Just a few weeks later, obviously, everything started to change. We'll be talking a lot about how that has affected you and the organizations that you're in throughout today. Change has been an important part of our story as well. 2 years ago, we had actually never hosted a virtual or online event in our life. Now we've hosted about 125. 2 years ago, about 10,000 people had come to our events around the country, and now it's about 100,000, including our online stuff, and you're part of that, so thank you so much. Not everything has changed, though. One of the things that has stayed the same throughout all of this is this core belief and idea in getting together with other people in the real world. That's a core belief that we've had from day one. It's part of our founding. When thoughtful people, that's people like you, get together in the real world and actually get to see each other, it creates a positive environment, and that can help inform these kind of things, remove distractions, get you focused, connected to other people, and able to think about making positive change when you get back to your day at work. So if you're here, you must believe that too. And that's a value that we all share. So let's talk about values. The remarkable events of the past 2 years, for many, have caused a stark reevaluation of values, including a redefinition about the relationship between business and society, as well as between companies and the teams that make up those companies. The pandemic, of course, created this instant and wrenching reinvention of the physical relationship that we have with our workplace for many. Then, the events of the same summer set off a conversation around the country about racial justice and about the role of business in being a part of that conversation about justice. Most recently, in the last few months, the headlines have turned to the Great Resignation, which I think is probably more accurately described as a great realignment rather than just a resignation. But that's something that has taken hold within the workplace as well. Every one of the issues that's just been mentioned is an important issue of values. Companies are being held to a higher level of accountability in a way that feels, hopefully, maybe, a little more real or a little more permanent than it has in the past. People demand that the companies that they interact with, whether that's as customers or community members, or especially as part of the teams, they demand that those companies' lived values and their stated values line up. If they don't, there's going to be consequences for perhaps the first time or in a more meaningful way than before. So we founded from day one to talk about what's happening to us right now with that conversation. Everybody wants to get together. They want to talk about the future of work. This is not a future of work conference. We don't do that. This is about right now. This is about what's happening right now and the conversations that are happening. So now that these ideas have everybody's full attention, if you're even in alignment with these values and you share these values, you still haven't gotten started yet. Now that they have your full attention, what can you actually do about it within your organization when you get started? How can you consider social, ethical issues in your organizations and business models from day one? So we've gathered an incredible group today. They're working on these issues right now. These are people with unique perspectives and insights to share. So we're really thrilled to be here and to be part of this and to learn from the people on this stage. But the group here includes you as well. So thank you, again, for being a part of that discussion. We're also thrilled to listen to you, and hopefully we get a chance to actually meet you today as well. But take a look to your left, take a look to your right, take a look around the table. The people around you today are here because they're looking for ideas, they're looking for inspiration, they're looking for practical advice. They're looking to meet someone like you who's looking for the same thing. So say hi while maintaining the appropriate and socially responsible amount of social distance for the late February of 2022. Anyways, welcome back to From Day One. Thank you so much. And thank you to our sponsors, without whom today would not be possible. Our sponsors are the Alliance Theater, ARC Fertility, Affirmity, Caraloop, Clerky, Cool Leaf, DDI, Droup, E4E Relief, Jet Dental, Novati, and WorkHuman. And you can meet many of them here right outside this door. So a couple quick logistical notes, and then I'm going to get started with our first session. There's breakout sessions that are happening. They go on before and after lunch. So check your programs. You can decide on which one you want to go to. And just note that those are in different places. They're kind of scattered around this venue. There's one to the right on this side of the wall, another one here, but you go around registration. And then one is in what's called the Antarctic room, which is to the left from where you walked in. So they're in the sort of three corners, I guess, of this room. So take a look at which one you want to go to and maybe get a sense of where you're going before that time comes. Note that we have a couple options for social distancing. You may have seen the different lanyard colors when you came in. Those who chose magenta or pink sort of colored lanyard are asking you for a little more space today. So please be respectful of that and keep an eye out for that. In addition, during the meal service, for those comfortable sharing a table with fellow attendees with their mask down or while they're eating, this is the place for you. They're going to be in here. The food will be right outside these doors. But also, the Arctic and Atlantic rooms, those are the ones on either side of us, have some high-top tables at the back that are nice and set apart. So if anyone's a little concerned, they are welcome to join those areas for solo eating pleasure. So with all of that out of the way, I would like to introduce our first fireside chat of the day. This one's called 2 Years Later, It's All About the Follow-Through. And we have an amazing speaker today, the DEI leader for a legendary brand, a brand that's legendary, especially here at home, to illuminate how the Coca-Cola Company has turned a social justice movement into a sustainable and global strategy for their company. So please welcome to the stage, Lori George Billingsley. She's the Global Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at the Coca-Cola Company. She's been at the company for 19 years in various roles, most recently as Vice President of Community and Stakeholder Relations for Coca-Cola North America. She's being interviewed today by my co-founder, Steve Koepp. He's the Chief Content Officer at From Day One and a veteran journalist who has served as executive editor at Time and Fortune magazines. Welcome. I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's great to be here with you, Lori. Thank you for helping us kick this off. It's been almost exactly 2 years, as I think Nick mentioned. Time kind of collapsed, but back then we were talking to leaders from Atlanta and regional business like Coca-Cola, and little did we know how much would transpire in those 2 years. So it's been super eventful. Which brings me to my first question, which is that it has been almost 2 years, it'll be in May 25th, since the murder of George Floyd sparked nationwide protest, worldwide protests really, about social justice, racial disparities, systemic racism. And when that happened, corporate America made these giant commitments to, it's gonna be different, we'll do better, we'll do more. So could you tell us, like, that Coca-Cola was among them. Sure. What did Coca-Cola do in response to that and the events of that summer? And when you think back to that time, what were the things that developed as your strategy? Like what worked and what are you proud of?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me here this morning, Steve. I appreciate it. And it's great to actually be with people in person and not through a TV screen or a computer screen. So, like many of you, when everything happened 2 years ago with George Floyd, I personally and professionally was impacted. So from a personal perspective, I have a nephew who I raised, a brother, a husband, all of whom are Black. And so personally, I had to kind of take it all in and deal with it. But then also professionally, shifting over, being over diversity, equity, and inclusion, people were looking at me, What are we going to do as a company? What are you going to, have us do? How will we respond to this? And what I would say is what I'm most proud of is how our CEO stepped up. So our CEO, we held a global town hall shortly after, probably a week after everything happened with George Floyd. And James Quincy, our chairman and CEO, opened the global town hall by saying all of the names of the people who had been murdered.
Wow.
And it was super impactful. He was getting all choked up, and I was like, James Quincy, I could not believe you were about to cry on this town hall. I mean, I started getting choked up. People started getting choked up because it was such a watershed moment, and it was an opportunity for us to, talk about where we were on the DE&I journey and what we were going to do, and how there were things, we've had moments where we've, like all of you that are in the DE&I space, it's a journey. So you have ebbs and flows. You have times when you're doing really well, and you have times where you look at it and you say, ooh, we're slipping here. We might need to do a little more and shore up some spaces. And so one of the things that we did was actually developed a global social justice framework for action, because we have 9 operating units around the world. And while race is very prevalent in terms of the issues here in the United States, outside of the United States, it might look very different. So in Japan, it might be more about, ageism. In other parts of the world, it might be about religion and faith. And so we wanted everybody to be able to have something that they could work from to address the social justice issues within their local markets. So we came up with these 4 pillars. Actually, James came up with these 4 pillars around listen, lead, invest, and advocate. And what we decided was that framework would be what we would follow for how we would actually make decisions about what we were going to do in the social justice space. We also developed a social justice evaluation tool, because obviously, when something happens within a market, everybody wants to respond. They want to do something. They want to act. So what we wanted to do was be able to provide our system with sort of a methodology that they could follow to determine what level of action or not they would take and why. So it's sort of a scoring system where you answer a number of different questions, and based on the output, it tells you kind of, are you going to listen, are you going to lead, are you going to invest, or are you going to advocate? 3 things that I'll mention that we did in no particular order of many. We put together a social justice agile team of 40 employees who raised their hands and said, we really want to be part of the solution. We want to come up with some ideas on actions that we could take. It was interesting because some of the actions that they wanted us to take, we were already doing. So that let me know, like, we needed to do a better job of communicating about some of the things that we were doing in our space. But there were 3 things in particular that they came up with. Of the 500 ideas that came in, we kind of boiled them down to 35 that we would act on. And 3 I'll mention. One was an allyship guide that was developed by employees for employees to really help people understand how they could talk about and engage on the topic of social justice and racial equity. So that was something that was developed, again, by employees. The second thing, we announced global aspirations and local goals. So we announced that we were going to be 50% led by women by 2030, and that from a racial perspective in the US, we wanted to mirror the market. So from a racial perspective, Asian, Hispanic, African American, we wanted to be 6%, 13%, and 18% represented at all job grade levels so that we would mirror the census data. And then around the world, with all of our other operating units, we developed locally relevant aspirations. We didn't want to roll out with, being dictatorial about how every market needed to show up. We wanted them to develop what made sense for their markets. And then the last thing I would say, we made a public announcement around supplier diversity that we were going to sort of double what we were doing in that space. So by 2025, we would commit to $500 million with spend with Black-owned businesses. So those are some of the things that we did. Still a journey and still more things that we can do, but I'm really proud of how we showed up as a system in responding to the social justice issues.
Wow, impressive. One follow-up question.
Sure.
It sounds like you created a kind of toolkit for responding to situations. Would that be like new issues that crop up that are related, like voting rights, the battle over voting rights, and where will companies stand on that? Would that be a case where a lot of companies just have to scramble suddenly? But
Yes.
it sounds like you have a...
Yes, so really good point. And the social justice framework was developed first, and then we did the evaluation tool later.
Yeah.
In between that, the voting rights issue came up, and so we were dealing with it, and it was a really good way for us to kind of refine that evaluation tool, because you're right, these social justice issues occur, and one of the things that's really important, just like with the DE&I side of the house, is having a plan already in place. So it wasn't like we were scrambling and trying to develop what our DEI strategic plan was. We already had that in place. And so having some of these things in place and these tools sort of on the ready helps you so that you're not being reactive, but that you're able to be thoughtful and have a process in place. So now that we do have the tool, you're right, it helps us with things like, the Olympics, or issues around the world that are happening that we really need to give guidance to our employees and associates on the ground on how to respond to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things companies did too, and big organizations, was to elevate the people in DEI in their organizations, create C-level people to run this. But those people didn't necessarily go to college to study this back in the day. So what was your own path to it, and what makes it really inspiring and compelling for you?
Sure, it's a great question. And so for me, I have to go back to my childhood. You know how they say everything starts in your childhood? It's true. So I grew up in a house with two parents who, my father was a minister and then a grants officer for the Ford Foundation and ended his career as a diplomat with the U.S. Department of State. My mother was a kindergarten, first grade teacher. One of the things that my parents did was they really brought together the community in our house around our kitchen table to solve societal problems. So I grew up seeing church leaders, nonprofit leaders, government officials, politicians, neighbors coming in our house to talk about the issues of the day. If it was education reform, civil rights, integrating neighborhoods, which we did, a whole host of issues. And I just saw how bringing those people together really helped to provide a platform for action. And so that stayed with me growing up, seeing that in real action, in real life. I went to Howard University. I don't know if there are any Howard. Usually there's somebody in the audience that went to Howard. So I have to do it myself. HU, you all don't know what that means unless you went to an HBCU. I went to Howard University, and one of the things that was super cool for me was in studying public relations. Coca-Cola always seemed to have the coolest case studies around multicultural communication. So they were doing a lot in that space. And it really piqued my interest when I had the opportunity after graduating and going through a number of different roles in the public affairs arena in DC and then in Columbus, Ohio. My husband's a pastor. We decided we were going to move to Atlanta to start a church. I was still doing, the work I was doing. And I said, well, if we move to Atlanta, I've got to work for Coke. That's like the coolest company ever. Really had a great opportunity that opened up for me to start in their public affairs department. And that was almost 20 years ago. And the thing for me that culminated it was really, if you remember the Hilltop ad, the one that's I like to teach the world to sing, that's just an example of the way in my mind that my family would bring people together. That commercial was all about bringing people together after a war to really talk about unity. And so I've had the good fortune of working at Coke now, like I said, for almost 20 years. And this role was really an alignment of bringing together sort of my passion and my purpose and being able to make a difference, both inside the four walls of the company as well as outside the four walls of the company. So I've been truly blessed to be able to make a small impact on the DE&I journey for the company that's over 135 years old. So
wow,
That's my journey.
And how many employees, including all the affiliates?
So if you count everyone in the Coca-Cola system, it's 750,000 employees around the world.
Yeah, that would be a very large city unto itself. So now looking toward the future and getting back to the first part, but expanding on it, it's been said, and you've said, that companies have to have an ever-evolving strategy to respond to events locally, regionally, nationally, and globally, all of which encompasses your role. So what can you tell us about the vital components of that DEI strategy? No matter how big the company is, by the way. Yes.
Absolutely. So what I've learned over the past 3.5 years being in this role is that you can't try to boil the ocean. It's like pick 1 to 3 things that you can really focus on and go deep with those and embed those within the company. I think there are 3 things that you really need to think about, and there are a couple of partners that we work with, Gartner, Catalyst, Diversity Best Practices. Those are also really great resources to tap into, regardless of the size of your organization, to get sort of best practices, consulting, real life examples of things that you can do. But 3 things that I would mention that one of our partners, Gartner, always sort of stresses. One is develop the commitments that are relevant to your business. So don't come out of left field with something that doesn't align at all with your business. Remember that DE&I is a business imperative. So just like any other business goal that you're trying to accomplish within your company, diversity and inclusion comes from that same sort of mindset. So how does it align to the business objectives that your company has already set? And then what commitments can you layer on top of that that can really help you drive deep into your organization? The other thing that I would say is create goals and determine who's going to be responsible for them. So, I told you that we just announced goals last year around a global goal as well as locally relevant goals. So that's sort of the North Star that everybody in the organization is working towards from both a global and a local perspective within their own markets. And then we've established who within those organizations are going to be held accountable, which is the third point. There has to be accountability. One of the things that I'm really proud of that we did at the end of last year was got our board to approve ties to executive compensation against our DE&I goals. So then you really, really are holding people accountable for making the work happen within the organization. Now, the only thing that I would say about that is, you want to be careful that people just don't start throwing women in roles because they're trying to hit a target. You want to make sure that you have all of the right systems and processes and tools in place that will drive to a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture. So making sure you have things like diverse panels and diverse slates. Those are small things that you can do regardless of what size your company is. And then just showing people the data, letting them see this is where your function is, this is where we are as an overall company, and here's where we're trying to go. Small movement can make big steps in the end. The other thing that I would just say is really recognizing that DE&I is everybody's responsibility. I have 7 people on my team. I know that sounds ridiculous. Can somebody please tell somebody we need more people? But I have 7 people on my team, and I call them the small but mighty team. But DE&I just doesn't rest with us. It rests with the entire organization. And so we're an influencing organization, so you need to influence others to get the work done. And so that's kind of what I would end on, is just really using the power of influence and making sure that you just have a couple of things that you're trying to accomplish and not trying to boil the ocean.
Great. Now, when we talk about diversity, there's so many aspects to it, so many dimensions, and of course, we can focus on age and gender equity and the LGBTQ plus community, people with disabilities. Are any of these in particular getting some extra attention at the Coca-Cola Company right now because maybe they didn't before in the world?
Yep, it's a great question. I'm glad we talked about this before the meeting. So one of the things that we decided coming out of the social justice work was that we really needed to kind of galvanize all of this work in a way that made sense for everyone within our enterprise. So we have the Coca-Cola Company, and then we have our bottling system. And so one of the things that we did was looked at what we call our 5 universal truths. We define them in the following: culture and heritage, life, generations, and experiences, LGBTIQ plus, gender, and ability and wellness. We feel like everything that we're trying to accomplish from a DE&I perspective falls in one of those 5 categories. And so what we've done is we've launched inclusion networks around the world where they're focusing on those 5 issues within those local geographies. So we have 9 operating units. Within those operating units, one might say, hey, we're gonna really pulse in on life, generations, and experiences. And in a way to sort of provide tools for them, we've put together frameworks that kind of talk about the lingo that you need to use, what this actually means, how this could show up within a market, within the business, and how they can act on it using the employees, leveraging them to kind of bring it to life. So those are the 5 dimensions that we're focusing on and rolling out globally.
That's great. It's certain areas, well, that's a good way of building a structure around getting individual things done. Now, for things to succeed, though, it seems like these initiatives need many stakeholders. And I'm wondering if it helps that lately investors and activists have been holding companies accountable for making progress. So often they look at the numbers in terms of ESG criteria.
Yeah.
Does that kind of get more people pushing behind?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So over the past 2.5 years, I would say, I had the good fortune of working in share owner affairs within the company as well. So I'm sort of attuned to, the shareholder interest. One of the things that I would say is over the past 2.5 years, there has been such an uptick in investor and share owner interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It falls in the S of the E, S, and G. So I've been on a number of investor calls where they're actually talking to us about what are you doing in this space. You have investors that are starting new funds that are focusing on companies that are doing things in the DE&I space, in particular around female and gender equity. And so I've been talking to investors, talking to share owners. And the reason I think it's important is because when you have that sort of outside interest and outside pressure, it also builds a cadence internally for there to be more transparency. So one of the things that we did last year at the request of investors and share owners was become more transparent with our data. So one of the things that is super important around DE&I, as you all know that work in this space, is the data. What do the numbers say? How are you driving improvement and equity within those numbers, be it from a pay equity perspective, as well as just, within the numbers of your company and the people who are being promoted and the turnovers. And so we became much more transparent with our data last year in publishing it in our business and ESG report, which is online, that's updated regularly. We came out with our EEO1 data, published that for the first time. We started publishing our data, our demographic data around race, around gender. We are publishing data around our pay equity. We're now also looking at a way to measure inclusion. We're working with Catalyst, one of our partners, with something they have called an inclusion accelerator that measures 26 different measures of inclusion within your organization. We're looking at a way, how can we also publish that information? Because the more transparent you are, the less questions you're going to get about, what are you doing in this space? Where do you stand? So we're trying to be much more forthright publicly with our positions on racial equity, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as our data and being transparent with that. So I would say definitely there's much more of a surge of that, of interest, and even share owner proposals that are coming forward. But if you're doing the steps and being transparent with the actions you're taking, I think it just helps even more with investor sentiment.
I've heard too that it's like even a new job category is the ESG data, manager, just harnessing all that stuff from within a giant company like yours and
Absolutely.
pulling it all together. Speaking of stakeholders and supporters, it seems like you need boards of directors and people in the C-suite generally to be on board with the strategy. And so how would you advise people to help get those leaders on board, especially when investments are needed and changes?
Definitely. So I would say, it starts at the top. It really starts with your CEO. If your CEO and the executive leadership team are not on board, you're kind of like DOA. You really need that alliance, and you really need that support. And it's not just the CEO, but the board of directors as well. And how do you leverage the board? And generally, it's like the compensation committee or the talent and compensation committee for us. I report out to them several times a year on what we're doing in the DE&I space. Also providing that data to our executive leadership teams on a quarterly basis so that they can see how everyone is doing and where improvements need to be made. If you don't have that support at the top, I'm not saying like quit your job and go do something else. What I would say is then get the groundswell of support from within the organization. Do it through inclusion councils, do it through business resource groups where you have employees and others who are asking for change to be made, for attention to be put on this space. And so leveraging that and bringing those people together and having common conversations around what needs to happen within the organization from an employee perspective is really also powerful to then be able to go to the leaders and say, here are some things that people are asking for. Here are some things that people have questions about. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's develop a plan. Let's talk about how we're going to take action and move the needle forward from a DE&I perspective. And again, how can you get the visibility at the C-suite level as well as at the board of director level, and just making sure that you're having touch points with those people so that it doesn't become sort of out of sight, out of mind. Because this issue is not going away. I know everybody's been talking about, when is the window going to close on social justice? It's not closing. It's still something that's out there. Our country is more divisive than ever, and we want to make sure that, we're showing up and answering the call, and that when history records sort of what actions did we take, that we did the right thing.
Well, we have, in the couple minutes we have left, I have two questions, so
Sure.
maybe each one should get a minute or so, but that's a great
Speed
opportunity.
question.
So you mentioned briefly about thinking about suppliers in all this, and I'm sure Coke spends billions and billions on everything from bottle caps to truck tires, and how do you have some commitment to, well, you obviously have a commitment to that. Is there someone who really does marshal those billions for progress and help?
Yes, so we have a whole supplier diversity department that is led by an amazing gentleman who is committed to getting us to the $1 billion roundtable. We are looking at not just how can we do supplier diversity in the US, but also globally, and what that would look like, and how we can really allocate the spend and take it through our whole supply chain with customers and with others that we're using to even source local ingredients around the world. So we definitely have a commitment to that, and we are on our way to get to the $1 billion roundtable.
Excellent. And then I wanted to ask, in recent years, it seemed like advocates for DE&I felt that they had to make a business case. Like, this will affect the bottom line. So all you folks who are focused more on that, be on notice. But it seems like are we a little past that now, and it's really, no, okay.
No.
What I was going to say was, is it now just the right thing to do?
No.
Is it a moral case, or
No.
do you have to make all the cases?
You have to make all the cases.
Okay.
So definitely, I always go in when I'm talking about DE&I with the business case as just an anchor to remind everyone, this is why we're doing it. This is how it impacts our consumers. This is our consumer spend, like the whole full Monty on the business case for diversity. And then, I bring in the part about, and of course it's the right thing to do, it's the moral thing to do, but let's remember it aligns with our business. Because if you can align it to the business objectives and why it matters and how it's going to move our business, then it won't be something that'll go away.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
are right on time. That's one of our core values from day one. We are right.
I love that.
Lori, thank you.
Thank
we
you.
packed so much into this.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.